Another homeless training. My name is Carl Hetler. I'm the coordinator of homeless outreach for the city of South Bend. And we're joined today by Matt Borst, who is the executive director of Villages to Villages. Matt, welcome. Can you give us a brief overview of the program that you are doing here in South Bend?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I apologize again for the technical difficulty of not being able to log on and see all of your faces. So, but I am the executive director of Village to Village. Our nonprofit is about 11 years old, and just myself and my wife, we started this when we lived in Chicago before we moved to Michiana, and have been on a journey of what does it look like to serve specifically kids and vulnerable kids and families. So we do two main things in this area. We do some trauma-informed care training with a modality called trust-based relational intervention, or TBRI. So we do a lot of trainings with schools, boys and girls clubs, foster and adoptive parents, really anybody that is interacting with kids in any capacity. We've done trainings for community centers and all sorts of places. And then the second kind of thing that project that we started a few years ago is called Oasis Community. That is a housing project that we started in the near northwest neighborhood of South Bend, on the 800 block of Harrison Avenue, where we built. We have 3 buildings right now, 2 duplexes. They're upstairs, downstairs units, where these duplexes are specifically for young people who are aging out of foster care, so 18 or older. And they live upstairs in a studio apartment, about 400 square feet. And then downstairs is a 2-bedroom unit. And we have what we call cottage friends that live there, just people, from the community that want to live there and just be friendly, be a good neighbor, be supportive. We're not asking them to be foster parents or house parents or anything like that. It's just simply like, hey, I live here. I'm here to help you and support you and invite you over for supper. If you have anything that you have questions about, or if you need anything, like a door you can knock on. And so that's what our 2 duplexes, how they're kind of set up. And then my wife and I, we live in a single family home that we built. It's all in that 800 block of Harrison. So those are kind of the 2 things that we're currently doing in this area.
That's great. It sounds like you're having a huge impact. And we're going to be talking today about vulnerable youth and some of the trauma they've been through. So I want to give a caution and a warning that we're talking about traumatic things. And so if there's a need for you to step away, if you're listening live, or to pause this recording if you're watching it later, feel free to do that when we're talking about specific traumas that youth and children are experiencing in our community. I want to first talk about how trauma changes the brain and impacts behavior. For those of us who joined us last month with Jamie Rebold, the clinical director from Youth Service Bureau, we talked about how a teenage brain is fundamentally different from a child's. It's a completely different organism as it is developing, and it causes teenagers to view issues of like respect, risk, and reward differently. And what we emphasized last month was the importance of enforcing boundaries, ensuring fairness, and leading with respect. So with that as sort of our baseline, we're going to be talking about how youth experience trauma and how that impacts them. Trauma for all of us, whether it's children, youth, or adults, causes changes in our brain. It elevates our stress hormones and enlarges the amygdala in this one of the center parts of our brain. And it also thins out our prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking part in the front of our brain. And it creates weaker neural connectivity between these 2 parts of the brain also. These are all results of trauma. And so there is this physiological, biological impact when kids experience trauma and difficulties in their life that can last through into their adulthood if it isn't addressed. And here are some of the changes that we see in youth when they have experienced trauma that impacts them. They're less responsive to social rewards. They're chronically irritable and anxious. And these are some things we see in all youth, but it's heightened even more with youth who have experienced trauma and hardships. Youth also struggle to see how their behaviors impact others and struggle in relationships and engage in more problematic behaviors. Not all teens who have experienced trauma will push boundaries or misbehave, but it's much more common for those who've experienced those hardships. This background helps us understand some of the reasons why we have with problem behaviors with youth and how important it is to address them in a trauma-informed way. So Matt, I wonder if you can give us some general examples of what are some of the traumas that youth are experiencing today in the foster care system or in homes growing up in our community. What are some of the general experiences that youth are coming out of that with?
Yeah, Carl, first of all, thank you, and thanks to Jamie for kind of laying that groundwork. It's so important that we understand what's happening, at the brain level, what's going on inside of the young people who, are standing sometimes just across from us, right? And so part of our training is teaching adults, like, hey, this is this kiddo that's standing in front of us. Their brain is physically different simply because of maybe some of the traumas that they've experienced. And so it's really important to understand things like ACEs. I've also worked in the world as a CASA, and we offer some therapeutic interventions for young people too. And just from my experience, I think as we think about the ACE study, the adverse childhood experiences, I don't know that I can say I've ever met a kid in foster care who's been adopted that doesn't have an ACE score of 7 or 8. So things like physical, abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, whether it's physical and emotional neglect. And then those pieces of that household dysfunction that the ACE score talks about, that sometimes I think go under the radar a little bit because we have a tendency to say like, oh, kids are resilient, right? And so things like household dysfunction, divorce or separation, experiencing domestic violence in the home. When I was a CASA, one of the magistrates would always share a study that she read, and it was a study that showed that just physically, just hearing domestic violence in the home has the same impact on the brain as CTE does, that you see in like football players or people who play impact sports, and it's just simply from hearing domestic violence, in the home. So I think that all or a lot of those ACEs are very, very common in young people who have spent time in foster care. And so understanding that a lot of the things that we teach the adults is that when you are working with a 10-year-old, it's more like about half their age, half their chronological age developmentally. So understanding that hey, this 10-year-old may be acting more like a 5, 6-year-old. And it's just simply because of the hard things that they've been through.
So just to recap, you're saying there's about 10 different categories in ACEs that talk about abuse and neglect and dysfunction, and that for many of the kids in foster care, you're seeing at least 7 of them that they are experiencing growing up in that type of environment. Is that right?
Yeah, that would be correct.
And that tracks what we see with our adult unhoused population too. Hope Ministries recently surveyed all their residents and found that the average ACEs score was 6.5. And so it's one of the reasons why we see these difficulties carry even into adulthood when they've experienced deep traumas. For those on the call or watching later, you can think about the number of different difficult experiences you had as a child. Most average Americans, it's between 1 and 2 is what we experience. But maybe there's more that you have been through and that you've either addressed or maybe something you still need to address in your own personal life. When you talk about youth acting half their chronological age, how does that come out in behaviors for people who have more developed bodies as teenagers, yet are often functioning at more the elementary level? What does that sort of look like in practice?
Yeah, I think the hard part is that, you alluded to it earlier, Carl, that, these young people, their prefrontal cortex, like you said, the thinking, the logical part of their brain is underdeveloped, and their survival brain or their downstairs brain is like overdeveloped. So their survival strategies of like lying, manipulation, triangulation, like these strategies are like so prevalent, and almost are like those go-to responses. But the prefrontal cortex, the upstairs part of our brain, their brain is underdeveloped. So things that would just simply be very easy tasks or things that we might be asking them to do, they act like a 25-year-old street smart kid, but like their behaviors are, super low when it comes to some of those things. And helping, we go a step further in the sense of like even helping and empowering the young people to understand like how or what is happening inside, their brain, or how one of the things we talk about is the 5 Bs of trauma and how it affects the brain, how it affects behaviors, beliefs, body, and biology. And I think that kind of fast forwarding to a little bit of that adult, 18, 19 that are living in Oasis, we see these young people living here who, because of trauma that they've experienced, and that affects the beliefs, about themselves. What they believe about themselves then comes out in the behaviors that they choose to participate in. Because if they have a low self view of like, I'm worthless, then that comes out also in behaviors of like choices they make when it comes to like a romantic partner. And excuse me. And so we see all of these things are interconnected, because it's not just simply behaviors, but it's like it affects their beliefs, which then pours out from from the behaviors. But if you chase it back, it's really the root is just the belief about themselves.
And those beliefs have been shaped by the traumatic things that have been done to them as children, have really changed how they think about themselves because of how other people have treated them in their childhood and youth.
Mm-hmm.
So we see the impact that trauma has on youth, not just on the brain, but then also on their behaviors and interactions. It's really helpful what you described as the overdeveloped survival strategies, but underdeveloped relational and thinking abilities that really helps show the challenge that is often outside of one's own control that we may see in behaviors, but understanding the root of it is really helpful. One of the things that in the national training Ryandow talked about is to contrast with ACEs, as idea of PACEs. What are positive childhood experiences that help shape youth and can help them rebuild that? And it sounds like some of that is what you're doing with Oasis, but also with the trainings that you're providing also on trust-based relational intervention. One of the positive childhood experiences is feeling safe and protected by adult in their home. How do you try to do that at Oasis to create a sense of safety and protection for these youth who have often not experienced that earlier in their life?
Yeah, the whole model of Oasis is what's called an intentional neighboring community. If once we've built everything and once it's completed, the architecture, it's a cottage court where all these buildings face each other. There's a courtyard in the middle, and it's all very purposeful to help foster relationship and connection. There's a lot of great safety nets in our community. We're not we're not those. We are knowing what we're not is super important. Like we're not an addiction recovery program. We're not like there's places where people can go for those things, and that's the partnerships we're looking for to connect these young people to services. But what they need, and and I would even suggest that all of us need is connection and relationship. That's how we're wired. And so that's exactly, when we think about PACEs and those positive experiences, participating in community traditions. Like, so what do? We try to have a meal together, or we try to do and create, rituals and routines that we do together to help them feel connected, help them feel supported by the people that, the cottage friends that live below them. Doing what we can. Like, this is, again, we're not, we're not the social worker component, but like we're the relational component. And as we think about those positive, and we teach those things to teachers, because one of those PACEs is having, two adults outside of your home that took a genuine interest, in you as a child. And like every teacher gets the opportunity to be, quote unquote, a PACE for a kid, right? And what does it look like to take a genuine interest in someone? What does it look like to create an environment of trust and felt safety? And I think that, when I look at other where other kids are placed, unfortunately, like here's the kind of the places that are available for these young people. And a lot of times it just happens to be in, places where they're just surrounded by negative influences. And so if we can remove those negative influences and surround them with like positive, and I don't know, it couldn't be positive childhood, but just positive experiences now where they get to see what does relationship look like? What does connection look like? What does a family, and have that connection and have that relationship. That's how we're trying to, I guess, counteract some of those traumatic experiences in their life and begin to see, hopefully them process trauma through the services of many people on this call, like with a therapist and walking through those types of things. But can we be that connection, that relationship, and let the community that they're providing these other services do their part, but we're doing the connection, the relational component that they need.
Absolutely. You've hit a lot of the positive childhood experiences. One other one is feeling that their family or support group is standing with them during difficult times. Is there a generic example you can give about how maybe one of your youth dealt with something difficult and had the cottage friends there to help support them during that difficult time?
Yeah. And this comes out in the simple things that, quite frankly, that you and I might not think about, from something as simple as like going to the emergency room when something's wrong. Who do they call to say like, hey, I need to go? And is an ambulance always the right, answer? Like, well, it's better than nothing. But like, I can say that, when there were situations, and there's been a few, that they needed to go to the hospital. And that was just a simple knock on the door. We also had a situation where the loss of a close relative, that one person in this young person's life passed away unexpectedly. And I get a call from the cottage friend because, the young person is more in that downstairs brain and just like, really upset, rightfully so. And so how can, then our community can come along and, and just be there, be present. We don't have to fix it, but can we be present and sit with them in the pain and say like, yeah, this sucks. But it's going to be okay. Right. Because we all need that. And if they didn't have that, it's, who do they turn to? Who do they, because it can be a very lonely world for these young people. And, loneliness breeds a lot of other unhealthy, habits and situations.
That's right. And obviously, Oasis is a unique situation where you're living in relationship and in community and have that opportunity to do that. But there's also strategies that we can do as service providers whenever we're interacting in a professional or community situation with youth who have been through trauma. And so we're going to talk about some of the practical strategies that we all can do when we're interacting with youth who have experienced trauma. And so we're going to talk about some different tools, one of which, the first one is talking about our own mindset that we have. And it's a reminder that we have to remember it's not personal, it's not about us. When youth are misbehaving, whether it's intentional actions or the dysregulation, but we have to remember that threats and punishment only make dysregulation worse if that's the issue and it's not willful disobedience. And so what we have to learn to do is how to regulate ourselves in part so that we can help others co-regulate. That research has shown that if we can stay calm and regulate ourselves when a youth is upset, that can have an impact on them and influence them when they are having difficulty with those survival instincts that, like you said, are often heightened. So what do you do, Matt, to be able to stay calm and co-regulate a traumatized youth? What are some personal strategies that you use?
Yeah, that's good stuff, Carl. One of the things that we teach, and I wish I was on the video so I could show you, but it comes from Dan Siegel and Tina Bryson, the hand model of the brain. And if you can go on YouTube and just like type in the search bar like hand model of the brain, and you can get it. And it's just a simple illustration that they use this language of flipping our lid, and we teach all kids. I mean, as young as 4 all the way up through adults. Like, hey, when fear or when we are, experiencing something that triggers us, like we have a tendency to flip our lids. And for some of us, that happens when we are driving. You're easily triggered, right? Or maybe you are afraid of heights and you flip your lid. Or we see this in sports all the time with people that, flip their lid. And we empower young people, but also empower our adults that like, hey, this is normal. This is how our brains are designed, right? That when we flip our lids, that's how we know we're engaging our survival brain to stay alive. But like when we live in this state of fear, when we live in this state of survival, that's where, like you had mentioned before, the rush of that cortisol and the stress chemical just like floods the brain, and that's the toxic stress that's not healthy for us. So helping us as adults be mindful, like, hey, 2 flipped brains coming together, it never goes well, right? So when you think about co-regulation, if I can literally view this as like, I'm trying to bring regulation to the moment. So instead of, rising to their level of even volume, I get quieter because that brings a level of regulation. Like, hey, bud, or in a school setting, whatever setting it might be, I might even get as quiet as a whisper because I'm trying to bring regulation, to that moment. Being mindful of like all the things that I bring to this relationship, right? That's a big piece that we start with our trainings of like, hey, relationships are a 2-way street. So I have triggers, and if a kid rolls their eyes at me and that's triggering to me, I need to be aware, because if I'm working with a junior hire, it's probably, I have 5 kids, I'm 5 for 5 with my junior hires rolling their eyes at me. So it's going to happen. But that's a personal trigger. So do I take that personal or make it personal, or can I just, be aware of my own trigger? And, I think that's a big piece. Knowing our own attachment styles is, again, it's a lot of doing the same work ourselves of like, hey, I'm a dismissive attachment style. So understanding that like I'm bringing that into my relationship with whatever, coworkers, with kids, with whoever we're serving. And I think that's a big piece. But then there's just the simple things of knowing what works for us to help us regulate as individuals. And that can be, again, you just have to be mindful of like, hey, is it deep breaths? Is it music? Is it going for a walk? Is it, whatever it might be? Those are things that we have to kind of be aware of, and be mindful of, so that we can, like you said, bring regulation to this interaction.
Those are some helpful pointers for us all to reflect on, and for us to consider what is our attachment style, what do we bring to the relationship with the youth if that's already been established, and what are our own ways that we regulate ourselves. And so knowing ourselves is really helpful in doing that work now, so when we are interacting with the youth in our professional or community aspect, that we're able to then bring that co-regulation and be that calming presence. So those are helpful things for us to reflect on, Matt. Thanks for sharing that. Another
When I
point
think,
to help
Carl,
youth. Yeah, go ahead,
sorry.
Matt.
Well, I was just going to say too, like when a kid feels in danger or when they feel afraid, even though like we as adults, we might know that they're not, but like they feel it. So when you bring a dysregulated state, in the sense of like when you challenge their outbursts with your own outbursts, or they're yelling with your yelling, they will continue to rise, because they're being challenged and they're going to meet your challenge and raise you one. And so just knowing that, like, as the adult, getting louder and bigger is only going to be met with that kiddo getting louder and bigger. And, because they're literally operating, with that survival brain, and it is about surviving, not willful disobedience.
Yeah, that's helpful to know so that we don't escalate things. And that doesn't help resolve things at all. I was going to say that another good point is about body language, that not only do youth respond to our own outbursts, but even our own body language. And the reality is that for youth, especially who've been traumatized, that there is no real neutral body language that you have, that it's often viewed negatively by youth. So they not only can get more agitated when we are angry and visibly upset, but even just being neutral is seen as harmful and threatening to them. So the two emotions that are really helpful for youth to see demonstrated, that we sometimes have to even overemphasize when working with traumatized youth, is that we are happy to see them and friendly, and then we're also sad by the difficulties that they are facing, and whatever it is that is causing them to feel that sense of fear and threat, as you mentioned, even if it's not accurate or realistic. And I've known you, Matt, a lot, and too bad we don't have video because you always have a very friendly face. But what makes you so friendly? How do you keep that friendly attitude when you're working with youth in often very difficult situations?
Well, thanks, Carl. We part of TBRI is the whole foundation of it is connection and relationship. And so we literally teach adults, how do you connect with kids? Because just like what you described there, and we're talking like eye contact, matching behavior, meaning like I'm on their level, looking in the eyes. Like these are, how do we have healthy touch? How do we, be mindful of our tone and our volume, our cadence? How do we be playful? Like these are all things that we do to connect with people. But like with kids, it shifts. If we think about eye contact and we think about our own stories, we think about, our own caregivers maybe saying something like, hey, look at me. Most of us, probably that meant that we were in trouble, right? And so, but when we think about like a baby, and you're holding that baby in your arms, like they're just getting bathed with this like soft eye contact, and lots of like healthy touch, and like our tone, we get like ridiculous with our tone, and they start talking in baby voices, and our tone, just so playful. And all of that is to help this little one feel safe. And those same principles go with like with these humans as they get older. So as we think about how do we connect? Because what I'm going to ask for, in in correcting, I should have done in connecting. So if I want the eye contact when I'm trying to correct, that's the same thing. I better be giving it in connection. And just for me personally, as an individual, of faith, I just feel, as I have learned more and more about TBRI, connection, relationships, I feel like if I was to boil that down, it's like treating people, the way Jesus wants us to treat people, loving our neighbors as we love ourselves. And I think that this component of like connection and relationship is the most important, piece when we think about vulnerable people.
Yeah, those are some helpful guidelines, and you're definitely having a huge impact on a lot of the young people in our community. A third strategy is about giving options that you can live with,
Mhm.
using rules, but then giving youth choices. Can you think of an example of a time when you're able to give a youth who is having difficult behaviors and feeling that survival mode some options, multiple options to choose from to help resolve the conflict and help them calm down?
Yeah, choices is a great tool, we call it. And uh, because what's happening at like that brain level is like that the individual who's standing in front of us, right, is they have the sense of like they are out of control. And so if we can give them some sense of control of how this is going to play out, we're giving them voice. We're giving them that like, hey, your voice matters, which that's a belief they don't believe, right? That's something they don't believe. My voice doesn't matter. No one has ever listened to me. So when we give people choices, they get to say like they get to have a say in how this is going to play out. Um, and we also use what we call compromises because I might give a choice. And I mean, it can be something as simple. Would you like to, do this now, or would you like to do it in 5 minutes? Would you like to do this with a pen, or would you like to do this with a pencil? Or even at, when we think about Oasis, when there's a lease violation, we give them a choice. Would you like to live at Oasis, or would you like to find your own place? And we can help connect you with people who can. No one's forcing you to be here, right? You get to choose to be here or not, because that's not kind. So they're not like assigned here. So they have choice. They have voice with kind of a saying. They have voice and choice. But sometimes like, hey, would you like to do this or this, or do you have an idea? And that becomes more of a compromise situation of like, and they might have a great idea that you didn't think of, and you're like, oh, that sounds great. Let's do that. So like in a school setting, and again, you get to be the one, quote unquote, it's in charge. It's your power that you're sharing with them. That's kind of how we use it. It's like my power to share with them. Would you like to do this at your desk, or would you like to do this, on the floor in the corner? Like you can choose. And it removes that that power struggle language of like you're going to sit here and do it because I said so, but you're giving them choice on like maybe the location if you're comfortable with that. So choices, compromises, big piece, but really teaching them that like, hey, the reason we're giving you choice is because we want you to know, and then hopefully at a belief level that like when you use your words, I will listen to you. It doesn't mean that you're going to get your way 100% of the time, but I will listen to what you have to say. And that's a big piece when we're dealing with kids. It's like, hey, you have a choice. Use your words, and that's how you get your needs met, not through actions, but through your words.
Those are great examples and really helpful. One final strategy that Ryan Dowd gives is offering a reset, that we shouldn't just equate a bad choice that a youth makes with being a bad person, or that one
Mm.
bad day means all future days will be bad. And so even if you've had to ask a youth to leave your agency or services, when they come back the next time, allow it to be a restart and a reset or a fresh start for them. That if we expect people to be better the next time, they'll often live up to that. that impact and that expectation that they will improve. And so it's being prepared for that next time you see that youth that you've had an issue with, that maybe was having a dysregulated day when they were high on survival. That's expecting them to be more regulated, to be ready to interact, to think and relate the next time you see them is another helpful strategy that we can employ in the work that we do with youth who've experienced trauma. As we wrap up, Matt, how can agencies partner and support the work of Oasis and what you're doing with Villages to Villages and your relational-based training?
Yeah, so like I think a big piece, is just awareness. Hey, we're small right now. We have 2 duplexes. They're both filled. We are in the process of raising funds for our second 2 duplexes. We're very grateful. The city has given us the lots to build, and then they just committed, for kind of phase 2, which is our next 2 duplexes, to invest $150,000 into phase 2 for us. So that's a big deal. So I think awareness, just understanding like, hey, this is the demographic of young people we're trying to offer housing to, and then also just partnering with one another. Like I had mentioned before, it's so important for us to know, like, we are not, we're not that addiction recovery. We don't do therapy for these young people. That's handled through their own therapists and connecting with the social workers and their case managers and things of that. If anyone knows of like rides, transportation is a huge need for these young people. So if there's a service provider out there that's like, we love giving young people rides to work, it's a barrier because a lot of them are working out in kind of Mishawaka, like whether it's at the mall or, Home Goods or Gabe's or Ollie's. And that's hard because those buses don't run, they get off at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, depending on, where they're working, and those buses don't run that late. So transportation is a big need. And we're trying to brainstorm that as a board of like, how can we provide, because they need jobs, right? They need to make money and provide, but if they can't drive, it's very limiting. And it's not that they can't, get their permit, but it's not an instant thing. And then it's also like to get their 50 hours or 40 hours, whatever it is, on their permit. It takes a lot of time. It takes somebody to like allow them to drive their vehicle. So it is definitely a big barrier. So I think just being aware of like, hey, that's why, for me to do something like this, to learn about other people and what they provide, is so important for us to be able to help, kind of meet the whole needs of what these young people are needing.
Yeah. And then finally, how can youth sign up if they're interested in getting on the wait list for Oasis Housing? And what kind of youth are the best fit for your program also?
Yeah. Basically it's an email to myself, just connecting me with the young person. I have an initial just phone conversation usually with them to tell them what we are, because Oasis isn't for everybody, right? Like not everybody wants that level of relational connection with people. And so we want to be upfront and say, hey, this is who we are. This is what we're about. Do you still want to pursue housing here? And if the answer is no, great. I don't need to know anything else about your story. And so, you can, it kind of saves a step. And then if they're like, yeah, that seems like something, then we just have a simple application that we have them fill out. And then they kind of have another conversation with a few members of our board, and then they kind of, I guess, get on the waiting list. But a lot of times our our units don't open up, super fast. So it will, when we start building our next two duplexes, we'll have a much better understanding of like our time frame of like, okay, hey, in October of 26 or whatever it might be, that's definitely much more predictable. But the two young people that are living there now are like, yeah, I'm living here, and there's no time frame for them. They can renew their lease, and as long as they're abiding by that lease and moving toward their goals, those are kind of the requirements that we have for them. So that's kind of how that works. And then I think as far as like best fit is young people who are open to that level of relational and component and that connection. It doesn't mean they have to be, like, oh yeah, I'm doing everything. Everything that we do is optional. When we invite people over for supper, like they don't have to come. There's no requirements, but like that is the purpose of the community. So, and then understanding that like, if there's a big level of addiction that they need more help, this isn't in treatment. If there's other, maybe mental health issues that are severe, maybe that wouldn't be a good fit either. But I would say those are kind of the few things is just being aware that like we are not that type of a service provider.
Sure, that's helpful to know. And what's the best email for people to reach you at, Matt?
Easiest way is, my name, Matt Borst, MattBorst @gmail.com, or Matt at village2village.intl.com. Either one comes to me. So
Great.
You can reach out through our website or email me directly, either way.
Wonderful. Well, again, I want to thank Matt Borst, the Executive Director of Villages to Villages, for joining us and talking more about not only their programs, but working with youth who have experienced trauma. Thanks so much, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me.